Mr. Li stood poised before a grand mansion, a pocket watch gripped in his hand. Inside, people gathered around the bed of the 98-year-old Mr. Wrong, who was on the brink of death. Doctors grimly noted that he had little time left. Suddenly, the door burst open. Mr. Li strode in, confidently declaring, "Mr. Wrong has exactly 2 minutes and 9 seconds left." The room swirled with murmurs. Men turned to confront him, some drawing guns. However, with a mere display of his pocket watch, they stood motionless, as though time itself had halted. In a matter of moments, Mr. Li was by Mr. Wrong's bedside. Introducing himself as a businessman, he hinted at a product Mr. Wrong would desperately want. Time. 10 days prior, Li's mother had advised him to abandon his taxing job and settle in the city. To Li, regular folks seemed out of place in Daman Capital, a global financial hub. Although life in Daman City felt unrewarding and harsh, Li remained committed to his dreams. One day, an anxious man collided with him, frantically proclaiming his tardiness. Li, glancing at him sharply, perceived the man's name, age, and unnervingly, his remaining lifespan, a mere 3 seconds. As predicted, a car fatally struck the man. Amidst the chaos, Li discovered the enigmatic pocket watch in his grasp. A single click, and the rain halted. Time had paused. When reality resumed its course, Li was equipped with a newfound power, to visualize people's remaining lifespans and manipulate them by redistributing time. He quickly recognized the lucrative potential of this skill, deciding to trade time, especially to the city's elite. The inception of a new villain, the Time Merchant, was marked. On a rainy evening, while Li sketched out his plans, his roommate, Yang, walked in. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, she found him strangely captivating. Dismissing it as a mere whimsy, she reminded herself of his status, a poor, adopted son, not exactly her ideal match. Yet, she couldn't shake off his newfound aura. Aware of Yang's indifference, Li resolved to leverage his unique ability to offer the affluent a coveted commodity, time. Drafting contracts that would legally protect his clientele, he christened himself the Time Merchant, and began his venture. The next day, seated on a park bench, Li scanned the crowd. The moral dilemma of taking time from the young or elderly weighed on him. Just then, a young man in a costume, juggling multiple jobs and aspirations of gifting his girlfriend an iPhone, caught his attention. His boss reprimanded him for not working hard enough. Li's watch revealed the man was 21 with 65 years ahead. Smiling slyly, Li realized he'd found his first potential client. The costumed man received a meager payment and departed cheerily, with Li closely trailing behind, preparing to make his first sale in a nearby restaurant. Li sat across from Zhang and pulled out a pocket watch. With a flick, he paused time and everyone around to showcase his unusual talent. Zhang, startled, retreated a few steps. Li rose, offering a handshake. "I'm Li, a time merchant," he explained. "You're mad," Zhang retorted. With a smile, Li responded, "I've roamed this world for years, trading in lifespans." "Interested?" Suspicion flickered in Zhang's eyes. "How do you know my name?" Li tapped his watch, revealing Zhang's details. "You've got a long life ahead. Ever thought of selling a bit of it?" Skeptical, Zhang inquired about the price. Li revealed a suitcase holding 3,000 yuan, roughly $46,000. "This," he began, "is the price for 1 year of your life." As Zhang pondered, thoughts of the gifts he could buy for his girlfriend surfaced. Working part-time jobs seemed a waste when he could just trade time for money. But selling a year of his life? That was an entirely different gamble. Li, sensing Zhang's inner turmoil, nudged, "Made your choice?" Taking a deep breath, Zhang nodded. "Just 1 year," he muttered, signing the contract. A shiver ran down his spine as he felt a year slip away. Li resumed time with a snap. Handing Zhang his business card, he hinted at potential future deals. But Zhang, still grappling with his decision, declined. 1 year is enough, he muttered. Undeterred, Li left it on the table. You might change your mind, he said cryptically. Li then strolled the city streets, mulling over his successful transaction. Seeking respite, he sat in a cafe and began scouting for potential clients online. A notable headline caught his eye: the patriarch of the distinguished Rong family, known for their massive tax contributions, was critically ill. A sly smile crept across Li's face. He smelled opportunity. That night, Mr. Rong lay on his deathbed, deeply worried about his esteemed family. As he lay there, Li made an enticing offer to extend his life. The gravity of the proposal made Rong's eyes grow wide, knowing the legacy he would leave behind was at stake. Whispers circled the room, many wondering if Li was a fraud. Li silenced the murmurs, reminding them that Mr. Rong's lifespan was down to a mere 10 minutes. How much would it cost? One man asked. The price, Li replied calmly, is a fifth of the Rong family's annual earnings, $15.6 million. A skeptical man accused Li of deceit. In response, Li revealed his pocket watch, showing that Mr. Rong had a mere 5 minutes left. The atmosphere grew tense as everyone waited for Rong's decision. His nephew, desperate, pleaded with him to make a choice. Mustering the last of his strength, Rong agreed. The nephew swiftly produced a contract for Mr. Rong to sign. Though weak, a sudden surge of energy allowed Rong to put pen to paper. The room was momentarily engulfed in a radiant light. As it faded, they found Mr. Rong revitalized, his lifespan now a full year. The room buzzed with astonishment. Li, satisfied, declared the transaction complete. Rong's nephews, still in disbelief, questioned their uncle about his well-being. With newfound vigor, Rong asserted, "I've never felt better." Li, smugly acknowledging his success, wished Mr. Rong joy in the year ahead. As the nephews tried to discuss payment, Li halted time briefly, leaving behind his account details before making his exit. When time resumed, the room was abuzz with wonder. Mr. Rong, to everyone's amazement, leaped from his bed. He sternly ordered all present to remain silent about the night's events. The nephew showed him the contract Li had left, and Mr. Rong commanded they honor the deal. Later, he gazed out of the window, deeply contemplating the enigmatic power Li held. He then instructed his nephews to form an alliance with the time merchant. Meanwhile, Li stood atop a city building, reflecting on the profound capabilities of his time control. With his unique time-trading abilities, Li was confident he'd made the right decision in becoming a time merchant. However, he realized that as his clientele grew, he wouldn't be able to help everyone. So, he devised a plan, the Longevity Club. The club would cater to everyone from the average person to elites and wealthy businessmen. They would be categorized into 6 levels based on their expenditure in the club. Level 1 members, those who spent millions, could redeem up to a year of life. Conversely, Level 2 members, who invested hundreds of millions, could gain up to 3 years. The vision for the Longevity Club was clear: to be the most formidable and enigmatic organization, and for Li to become a renowned global figure. To bring his vision to life, Li knew he needed a team of reliable and loyal staff. He believed these traits would often be found in those who had been hardened by life's challenges. One day, as he walked the streets, an elderly taxi driver offered him a ride. Observing the man's appearance, Li thought he looked much older than his actual age and surmised that he might be one of those people worn out by life's grind. Once inside the taxi, the driver, noting Li's refined attire, asked if he was a businessman. As Li was about to respond, he glanced at his phone and noticed a $15 million transaction from Mr. Rong. He took a moment before answering the driver's question. The driver's phone rang, and panic spread across his face as he answered the call. He quickly told Li that he needed to head to the hospital immediately and asked him to vacate the vehicle. Without hesitation, Lee replied that he would accompany him to the hospital. Gratefully, the driver continued, sharing his troubles about his high school son, who was in dire need of a significant sum to enroll in a prestigious university. The weight of not being able to provide for his son pained him deeply. Touched by the driver's story, Lee discreetly stopped time, placed a generous amount of money on the back seat, and left the taxi. When the driver arrived at the hospital and turned to thank Lee, he found an empty back seat, save for the money. With rising emotion, he stepped out, trying to call Lee back to return the money, but Lee was nowhere in sight. Attached to the money was a note from Lee, suggesting the money was merely a tip and providing a code for the driver to potentially earn more. From a hidden vantage point, Lee observed the driver's gratitude, thinking there was no need for thanks over such a gesture. A short while later, Lee noticed an injured blond man. Their eyes met briefly before the man walked away, accidentally leaving his medical report behind. Later that evening, when Lee returned to his apartment, he found Yang sprawled out, sleeping on the living room couch. Though slightly annoyed that she had once again fallen asleep there, his affection for her prevailed. He gently took a blanket, intending to cover her and ensure her comfort. Just as he was about to drape it over her, she woke up and asked, "What are you doing?" He tried to explain himself, but Yang interrupted him and said, "Just go to your room." She slammed the bedroom door, and he threw the blanket on the couch, knowing her reaction was normal because they were just roommates. Lee then sat at his working desk and started working on his longevity club idea. A couple of hours later, he decided to take a break, knowing the club would be formed in no time. He woke up the next morning, and Yang asked him why he wasn't getting ready for work. Lee said he took a day off, but Yang thought he was lazy and probably wanted to quit working and go to his hometown. He then closed the apartment door, sat in the chair, and said that, in fact, he didn't have to go to work anymore. Later that day, Lee went to a real estate consulting agency to check on some business. As the consultant talked about the houses, Yang approached, surprised to see Lee in the office. He said he knew she worked there, so he decided to come and see if he could find a suitable house. Yang couldn't believe her ears and thought somebody had just commissioned him. She asked Lee what his total budget was before he even answered. She told her working colleagues that she knew Lee, and she talked to him. Yang sat down and nervously talked about the available houses, mentioning a $70,000 house. Lee smiled the whole time and said the house was obviously old and small, but Yang told him to stop joking because the houses she offered met his criteria best, and there was no way he could buy a villa considering his income. Lee confidently sat in the chair and said the villa wasn't looking that bad, so Yang didn't know what to make of it and sent her friend back to deal with Lee. As a friend sat with Lee and talked about the house contract, he thought Yang looked even more attractive when angry. Mr. Lee interrupted the consultant and said he'd buy the house, but the lady told him to stop joking since the unit was 406 square meters big and cost $7 million. He replied saying he wants to buy the house from her, so she ran past Yang, calling her boss, saying she sold the most expensive house. Yang was suspicious and decided to wait until he signed the contract. The boss arrived and asked for a $500,000 deposit, but Lee proudly said that he doesn't do deposits but pays directly. Everyone in the agency started talking about Lee, and Yang couldn't believe that all this time, she looked for a rich man, and he was right in front of her nose the whole time. Gold digger vibes, maybe? Lee left the office and received a call from the taxi driver. Lee said the offer was still on the table, and the driver said it was time they met again. They met at the bus station the next day, and Lee suggested they find another place to talk. The driver said his father was ill and had to undergo surgery. He managed to survive, but staying in the ICU is quite expensive. He took some loans, and now his relatives are trying to avoid him and asking him to give up. The man started crying and said he needed money desperately and would do anything to get it. Lee took a sip of coffee and said he could give him a lot of money in exchange for his lifespan. The taxi driver asked if he was talking about some illegal activities. Lee demonstrated his powers of time control and explained that the things he offers are completely legal. The man asked what he was talking about, so Lee explained he's a time merchant, a person who buys and sells people's time. Then he asked if he'd like to trade his time for money, and the man asked about the price. Lee said he'd pay him 3 times more than he earns in a year for 1 year of his life. The driver immediately asked if it was possible to sell 3 years of his life in exchange for $1,350,000, and Lee said he'd only have 10 years left. The man said that the remaining lifespan would be just enough to fulfill his responsibilities as a father, so Lee instructed him to sign the contract if his decision was final. He signed the contract, and Lee transferred the money immediately. So, the driver took a walk to the hospital to pay his father's bills. Lee thought the man's burden should be lessened now, but still wondered if he'd regret the decision when the time comes. A moment later, the blonde drunkard from the last time threw a bottle next to Lee, saying it was his, and he better pay him back. Lee chuckled, so the man attacked him. Lee told a guy that, based on the medical report he dropped the last time, he'd leave for about a month and pass away. The drunk man got a bit scared, and Lee started walking away, telling him to follow him if he wants to live. The men followed him, and Lee asked questions about his illness and his family. The man said his name was Peng, and he had leukemia. Lee said he should be home resting, and his family must be worried for him. But Peng said he left the house and told him to pretend he already died. Wow, not depressive at all. Peng's answer was surprisingly positive. So, he decided to test the guy and speed up the time by 100 times. Their surroundings changed, and Peng asked what was going on. Lee told him not to worry, since he comes in peace with an offer to prolong his lifespan in exchange for his loyalty and freedom. Knowing the surrounding changes weren't an optical illusion, Ben asked what was going to happen next. Lee said nothing at first and just admired Ben's way of speaking and being straightforward. Tang waited for the answer and started thinking about his siblings and parents, and how he, not wanting to become a burden to them, left home to earn some money for his family before he died. Unfortunately, he wasn't accepted by people because of his illness, and now he knew that selling himself wouldn't be a bad thing after all. Lee interrupted his thoughts, asking if he made up his mind. Beng knew he'd die either way, so he kneeled as if he accepted the offer. Lee understood the gesture and gave him 100 days of extra time and perfect health. Beng felt the energy flow through his body, and Lee asked him how it felt to be healthy again. Ben realized Lee was for real and said he'd be his slave from now on, doing whatever Lee orders him to do. Lee handed him a piece of paper and told him to clean himself up and dye his hair black and come to the address written on the piece of paper. Lee looked down at him in order to call him master and then disappeared after taking the first steps in creating the Longevity Club. Lee knew he needed more loyal subordinates to help him ensure the growth, whether they'd be scientists, security guards, or IT specialists. It didn't matter, as long as they were helpful. A moment later, the apartment doors opened, and Yang appeared with a bottle of wine in her hand, looking wasted. She entered the apartment, and Lee immediately realized she prepared for that moment. After discovering Yang's wealth, she approached Lee and complained about him hiding his identity. She gently placed a finger on his lips. Lee calmly asked what she intended to do about it, with their faces still close, her lips near his ear. Yang suggested a punishment of 3 shots, but her attempts at flirting, drawn from her experience, didn't succeed. Lee had grown as a person since acquiring his powers, enabling him to resist her temptations and control the situation. He decided to escort her to her room and lay her in bed, which helped her sober up a bit. Yang began apologizing for her behavior, and Lee confessed that he actually appreciated cunning women like her. However, he emphasized that he had changed since his past and she would need to put in some effort to charm him. The tables had turned. The next day, As Lee worked on something, Miss Yang hurried out of her room, mentioning that she would be late for work and blaming it on excessive drinking the previous night. Lee reassured her that he had taken care of it and helped her secure a leave from work for the day. He advised her to rest properly, and she expressed gratitude. Yang wanted to thank him, so he suggested she cook something to test her culinary skills. She obediently agreed. Lee couldn't help but think how influential Hermione was at that moment. Suddenly, Peng Hao, like a disciplined soldier, appeared at the door, ready to follow orders. Li Liang, curious about why Peng Hao referred to Lee as master, learned that sir was a more appropriate term. Lee introduced a cooperation contract and went over its terms. One of the points was that they listed 3 things our protagonist couldn't make Peng Hao do. Without reading the rest of the contract, Peng Hao quickly signed it and handed it to Lee. Happy with the trust between them, our protagonist officially declared their cooperation, and they became a team. Lee assigned Lee his first task, to find a university student named Jing Bowen and deliver a piece of paper to him. Peng Hao took the paper and reassured our protagonist to consider it done. Lee couldn't help but appreciate how great it was to have an assistant. It definitely makes things much easier. If you want to join the Longevity Club, you won't be able to do it alone. Now, he starts thinking about other requirements for his club. You need to create a customer database. He should also prepare a venue for the club, using his experience as a programmer. He'll just need to find some people to help him work on the app. He's pretty confident he can do all of this while the employees at Windsor Green, which has the strongest firewall system, are going over the security measures. However, it gets infiltrated by someone. It turns out that the night before, NCT was under attack from a computer virus, an attack never seen before in history. The government computer system for the stock exchange collapsed. According to reports, financial losses for the country exceeded tens of billions. The report also states that the largest part of the cyber attack was on the computer laboratory at the NCT. The hacker broke through Windsor Green, a supreme computer, and took the confidential data of the laboratory. Reports claim that if this data is lost, it would cause great damage to the future of artificial intelligence. Psychologists claim that, based on the available data from the hacker's videos when he hacked the system, the person who hacked the system doesn't have much time to live. They also suggest that his personality is someone who enjoys performing and wants to create an event that will shake the world. Watching this, our protagonist realizes the potential opportunity. He calls Peng Hao to ask him to visit the Wong family. He wants to borrow some experts from them. In the next scene, we see a man in front of a bunch of computers, coughing violently. We learn that he is the one behind the infiltration of Windsor Green. There's a man suffering from a deadly tumor, and he doesn't have much time left. His intention is to cause the internet to collapse before he dies. While he's working on his plan, his firewall gets breached, and the hacker gets a message telling him that he won't die if he finds Mr. Lin. The hacker thinks this is just bait and won't fall for it. However, he gets another message telling him that he can be saved and should give it a try. He receives an invite to a video call, which he reluctantly accepts after some thought. At that moment, a video with Lee sitting casually appears, greeting the hacker by his real name. The hacker is shocked and wonders how Lee knows his name. Our protagonist tells him that he knows a lot more about him and, with a snap of his fingers, creates a projection of the hacker's information in front of him. Lee tells him that he has only 10 days left to live, leaving the hacker confused about how they found his location and other details. He also rejects the idea that he only has 10 days left to live. Lee gets serious and tells him that he's the only one who can give him more time. Our protagonist suggests that the hacker should use his computer skills to find him, and 10 days should be plenty of time for that. The hacker is upset by all of this, and just as he's about to ask Lee who he is, the video call ends, leaving the hacker puzzled about what happened and whether this is all a trap. Now we see Lee talking to a computer expert who helped him contact Robert. the expert mentions that Robert is highly skilled and might pose some challenges. However, Lee reassures him, saying that, in the end, the hacker is human, and all humans fear death. At the city airport, we see Robert looking dreadful, coughing violently, as he has decided to try to find our protagonist. He asks the airport staff, who are concerned about his excessive coughing, for assistance. Coughing, Robert tries to find the location saved on his phone. Acadilus mentions that Pan complains about feeling weaker already, even though he only used a couple of days of his lifespan. This makes our protagonists realize the limits of his power. It seems that the extra 100 days of lifespan only return Hao's body to the state it was in 100 days ago, and it doesn't prevent diseases from progressing. He can control time but not everything that comes with it. Lee thinks his medical knowledge isn't enough to solve these problems. However, he believes that if he views it from a different perspective, not as a human but as a collection of cells grouped together, his power might work. Excited about this idea, he orders Hao to bring him a precise microscope and a sample of his blood. Our protagonist mentions he has a hypothesis he wants to try, and if it works, there'll be a big surprise for Hao. After obtaining the microscope, we learn that our time merchant is researching his ability to slow down time. He believes that if he could apply this power to each individual cell, he might extend a person's lifespan. As he looks through the microscope, he starts observing the lifespan of each individual cell. Now he thinks that if he can use his ability to slow down time on the sick cells and reduce their spread, he could slow the progression of the disease. This could lower the risk of the blood cells dividing rapidly and enhance the chances of the disease weakening the body's immune system. His understanding of how leukemia affects the body helps him figure out how to assist Peng Hao. Next, we see the young robber finally arriving at Lee's mansion, still skeptical about the situation. Just as he's about to knock on the doors, they suddenly slam shut, and Hao runs out, taking him for a mere thief sneaking around to steal something. Robert tells him to let him go and threatens to expose his private information on the dark web if he doesn't comply. This catches Lee's attention, and he realizes it's the hacker. Our protagonist is really impressed with his skills, as he found him in no time. Lee also thinks that he's Chinese and has some proficiency in the language. Robert tells him that China is a dominant force in the world of technology, so it's not strange for him to know at least a bit of Chinese. Robert then cheekily asks Lee if he's the time merchant because he doesn't look particularly special. This annoys Lee, and he smacks Robert, leading to a brief scuffle between them. Our protagonist steps in and invites Hao to approach him. He then proceeds to test his hypothesis, focusing on the things he wants to manipulate.